Need for Speed. Probably one of the most recognizable racing video game series of all time. Almost everyone I've talked to have at least heard of this legendary series. It was the first racing video game series I've ever played, and I've been playing that series since 1999. Or was it 2000? Definitely one of those years at least. Despite Need for Speed High Stakes already being out at the time, my first drive into the series was actually Need for Speed 3, Hot Pursuit. Nearly a full decade later, I would own the Need for Speed collection, which included Need for Speed 2, Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, Need for Speed High Stakes, Need for Speed PORSCHE Unleashed, and Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2. Unfortunately, I don't have the box anymore, and I lost my PC copy of Hot Pursuit 2. Thankfully though, I still have Hot Pursuit 2 for the GameCube and PlayStation 2, so I'm not losing any sleep there. Anyway, I was surprised to learn that this collection never included the very first Need for Speed game. Why is the first one missing? Either way, I decided to get a copy of it from eBay to see what I've been missing, though I decided to get the PlayStation version since this was the only version for a system I currently own. This will be the version that I will be looking at since it's not only the only version I own, but also because I have no way of recording the 3DO or PC versions. Anyway, let's begin. Now, unless you're playing the 3DO version, the game literally has no story. And one thing exclusive to the PlayStation and Sega Saturn versions is the option to play the game in split-screen multiplayer. And if you're playing the PlayStation version, you can also play multiplayer by linking two consoles and two copies of the game together, assuming you're playing it on an original PlayStation. That being said, there are 4 modes to choose from. Time Trial, which allows you to race on a track alone and try to set a best time. Single Race, which is pretty self-explanatory. Head-to-Head, which is pretty much the same thing as Single Race, except that you race against only one opponent. And Tournament, which despite what you may most likely assume, is actually the same thing as Single Race, except that you're unable to change how many laps there are, and you're only given 3 or 2 cars to choose from depending on what track you select. When you first start, you have a total of 6 tracks to choose from. The first 3 tracks are your standard race tracks, those tracks being Rusty Springs, Autumn Valley, and Vertigo Ridge. The latter 3 tracks are point-to-point street races across 3 different segments per track, those tracks being City, Coastal, and Alpine. While selecting a track, you can choose how many laps to race, as well as what time of day you race on, those times being morning, midday, and evening. There's also a 7th track you can unlock known as Lost Vegas. Not Las Vegas, Lost Vegas, which is probably my favorite track in the game. Not only that, but it's also possible to unlock off-road rally versions of every track. In fact, you can even race on the moon, even though it's a rescan of the rally version of Rusty Springs. After selecting a track, you are given 8 cars to choose from, those cars being the Lamborghini Diablo VT, the Porsche 911 Carrera, the Chevrolet Corvette CR1, the Ferrari 512 TR, which is my personal favorite, the Dodge Viper RT10, the Acura NSX, the Mazda RX-7, and finally the Toyota Supra Turbo. There's also a 9th car you can unlock known as the Warrior, which is a fantasy car specifically made for this game. Once you select a car, the game will load up the race. The race begins with a countdown. When the light turns green, make sure to put your car in gear and start accelerating. Yep, even when you're driving an automatic, you still need to put your car in gear if you want to start moving. Thankfully, this is the only Need for Speed game to do that, and this issue is fixed in the sequel. Either way, not really a big deal. Most of the tracks are well designed, though some are definitely harder than others. If you're playing head-to-head mode on the point-to-point street races, then you'll also have to avoid traffic as well as the police. If a police car gets too far ahead of you, your car will automatically slow down to a stop and will be given a speeding ticket, costing you more time. And if you get busted a second time during the race, you'll be arrested and automatically lose the race. The standard tracks are very, well, standard for a racing game, but the point-to-point tracks are very impressive. It really feels like you're traveling from one place to another at high speed, and I still think it looks cool even today. As for how the cars control, oh boy, where do I begin? Now before I start talking about the control, I should probably mention a few facts about this game. The game was developed by Pioneer Productions / Electronic Arts Canada, But they also teamed up with automotive magazine Road and Track to match vehicle behavior, an example being the way the cars sound. The game even includes precise vehicle data with spoken commentary and even magazine-style images of each car.
Despite being 55 pounds heavier than its predecessor, the 512TR's additional 41 horsepower get it to 60 miles per hour, a whopping 1.5 seconds quicker.
There's also some cool videos you can look at to see the cars in live action. So yeah, this is indeed a simulator-styled racing game, and this game was pretty ahead of its time. Heck, I still think all of this detail is pretty impressive even today. It's also worth mentioning that this is one of the first fully 3D racing games. Before the Need for Speed, most racing games were sprite-based and had some sort of graphical trick for track design, games like Pole Position and Outrun. The only fully 3D racing games before the Need for Speed that come to mind are Virtua Racing and Ridge Racer, though Ridge Racer in particular was strictly an arcade game at the time. Need for Speed, on the other hand, has full 3D car models as well as full 3D racetracks with all of these textures and was a home console game. So yeah, this game was very big and revolutionary at the time. However, as impressive as it was back in 1994, the game has certainly aged. And it doesn't help that I was spoiled by newer, better simulator racing games at the time. As a result, I initially hated the way the cars control. Mainly because of the steering. I felt like every time I tried to slow down using the brakes while turning, my car wouldn't turn any sharper than it already was trying to, even when I tried slowing down. The only way I could take tight turns was to slow down first and then try turning afterwards. And even so, I felt like I had to slow down to slower speeds than what I was used to in the likes of Gran Turismo and Forza. Thankfully, I did eventually get used to it and can play the game just fine. Unfortunately though, I still have problems with the game. My biggest issue with the game is the crash physics. Once you crash, you pretty much already lost the race unless your opponent crashes with you, since your car tumbles, flips, and spins for several seconds, and there's no way to manually reset your car back onto the road. You have to wait for the crash to finish before your car automatically resets itself back onto the road. It's for that reason and that reason alone why I really hate racing with traffic on. It especially sucks when
you never see it coming.
I already hated that crap in the newer Need for Speed games, but I feel like it was even worse here since the crashes last much longer than it did in the newer games. And this is just an issue for me personally, but there's no proper way to drift in the first Need for Speed game. Every time I try to drift, I either understeer, oversteer, or lose way too much speed. As a result, it's pretty much impossible to drift properly. Drifting is one of my favorite maneuvers to pull off in a racing game, and I was very disappointed to find out that I couldn't drift properly in the first Need for Speed game. Even the first Ridge Racer game had a way to drift. Yeah, it didn't control very well, but it was still there at the very least. And this is just a minor issue, but there's no way to change the color of your car. The closest thing you can get to that is by playing two-player mode, in which player 2 has a completely different preset color for the cars he or she can choose. Despite those issues though, I still have fun playing the game. I especially love traveling at high speed during the point-to-point races, and I always did love the car selection, even though I couldn't change the color. Graphically speaking, it looks really good for an early 3D racing game. Not the best, but certainly really good for the time. The cars look pretty decent, and the tracks look even better. The cars also sound really awesome. I especially love how each car has a completely different engine sound. As for the music, it's fantastic. The Need for Speed has both rock music and techno music, and just about every song sounds amazing. The rock music was composed by Saki Kaskus, while the techno music was composed by Jeff Van Dyke. As a result, the Need for Speed has one of my favorite soundtracks in the entire franchise. It's not my absolute favorite, that honor goes to Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, but it certainly does come close. Seriously, these guys did a fantastic job with the entire soundtrack, and I highly recommend you give it a listen. However, I am truly sad to say that Saki Kaskas unfortunately passed away 2 years ago. It's really sad because this man also composed some songs for some other Need for Speed games as well, and they are still some of my favorite songs in the entire series. If you haven't already, please do listen to some of his work. It needs to be remembered fondly, and I really hope you enjoy it too. Overall, the first Need for Speed game is certainly interesting. It's the first game in the series, and man, it certainly does feel like it. The game is still fun, and I do enjoy going back to it every now and then, but it's really not one of the best games in the series, nor is it the best of the classic Need for Speed games. And from what I've seen, the PC version is apparently considered the best version, mainly because it doesn't look quite as pixelated as the console versions, thus making it easier to see oncoming cars and turns. However, I don't have that version, nor do I have any way of playing it, though I do hope I'll get to play it at some point in my life. With that being said, if you're just looking for a simple, fun racing game to try out for the PlayStation or Sega Saturn, consider giving the Need for Speed a drive. I give this game a 7 out of 10.